You sir at the back. We're going to move on to another aspect of it, because I'm very much aware that everybody's minds are focused at the moment because of this June 23rd vote on all the aspects of the EU. You sir, we'll move on to think about trade in a moment. Yes.
I think Britain's been very generous towards immigration over the years, for years and years and years. And I hope we will be to some extent. But the gentleman and Diane, where are these people going to live?
Actually.
You know, on the streets, there's going to be more crime. There has to be another way. You know, we cannot keep getting flooded and flooded with immigrants. Where's the infrastructure coming from? Where are they going to live?
With immigrants.
It'll be like a ghetto.
That's outrageous. Look,
can I just...
Go on, you go, and then...
And I say that as the son of a Polish immigrant.
No, but
I'm
can
very
I
proud of
just
it too.
say, this narrative which suggests that immigrants are a dead weight on the economy, that they contribute nothing, that they're just
No, I
this
didn't
huge
say
problem.
that.
Now,
I didn't say that at all.
Let me... No,
But the
that
country
is wrong.
cannot be swamped. It's logic.
Without immigration from the Second World War onward, we wouldn't have the National Health Service we have today.
I know, I wouldn't be here.
I don't think anyone is suggesting no immigration. Either there or on this...
No. I'm talking about the narrative. It's a negative narrative, and in the end it gets us
Diane,
nowhere.
but what do you say to what Giles Fraser said about allowing many more people in and being much more generous towards people from Syria, who are refugees, who aren't people coming from Poland like his father, but are people coming from the Middle East?
I visited in the past few weeks the refugee camp at Calais, and I visited Lesbos, where Syrian refugees are also coming to. And the conditions in Calais are disgusting, they're inhumane, and I certainly...
come over to the UK.
I certainly...
You're just spreading the problem.
I certainly...
It's all very well saying, oh yes, we can have an open door policy.
Let
her just answer the question.
I don't think that we are taking our fair share of Syrian refugees. These are people in desperate circumstances being exploited by people traffickers. I think we should step up and take a fair share.
Liz Truss.
Because that's the human
I
think it is much better
years.
to take the approach we are taking, which is to have a comprehensive solution that actually helps people nearer their home, rather than attracting people to Europe into the arms of the people traffickers who are killing people day after day. I think it's a huge problem if we attract more migrants, refugees to Europe, rather than saying, well, we're the second biggest bilateral donor in Syria. We're actually helping sort out the problem at source, give people homes, and make sure that they have a sustainable future in their region.
What homes are we giving people?
Well, we're giving them accommodation close to Syria, close to their homes, rather than them taking a perilous journey, falling into the arms of the people traffickers, and then not failing to accommodate those people in Europe. And we are taking 20,000 refugees, but we're doing it in an organised and systematic way so people are properly accommodated here in the UK, and that is the right approach.
Can I just say, if Diane really wants to help the Syrian refugees, why didn't you support military action against Assad and Syria?
Do you really think that bombing Syria would have helped anything?
I think bombing Assad's forces would help, yes.
The woman in the fifth row there.
So I think my view is that a group of my friends who are all nurses are, they've been raising money for a couple of weeks now, and they'll go over to Calais to the camps this weekend, where they will take with them sleeping bags, torches, medical resources, medical supplies, and they've done that off their own back with their own money, and a lot of us have sponsored for them to do it. It's not just a case of who's coming in, it's the fact that we're totally turning a blind eye to these people in need, and we're not going out to help anyone, with the exception of sending warplanes over to bomb Syria.
Okay. The man in blue, you said. The man in blue there.
I think that the argument has gotten a little bit more towards immigration. I think we, as a British public, are actually quite selfish. We love all the benefits of the EU without any of the disadvantages.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, it's more than just immigration. Let's not forget that any of us, at any time, can go to any of these countries and live there, and we have many UK nationals out. living in all these EU countries. What happens to all of those people when we suddenly close our borders?
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll go on to the wider aspect of jobs and the economy. Margaret Moult has a question. Let's stick with Europe for the moment. Margaret Moult.
If we leave the EU, would there be job losses and would EU trading be affected?
Julia Hartley-Brewer.
Well, we've heard talk, haven't we, of 3 million job losses and a complete closing down of all trade from the Project Fear Brigade, but absolute load of codswallop. I was a political editor for many years, been covering this for many years, and I honestly never heard more nonsense talked about any subject ever in my time as a political journalist. I very much agree with Giles on the issues of sovereignty and democracy, but I know that when it comes to voting on June the 23rd, most of us are going to be concerned about security and also the economy, and are our jobs safe? Is our trade going to be safe? And we had lots of nonsense coming out in the last week with letters from FTSE 100 chief executives. 36 signed a letter saying, you know, the perils of leaving the EU. Of course, let's point out that 2/3 of FTSE 100 chief execs chose not to sign the letter. And a small point that 16, I think, of 15 of the 36 have received EU funding, and 8 of the 36, by the way, in 2003 warned of the perils of not joining the EU and how our economy would collapse. And how's that working out?
Well, what do you think would happen, Julia,
if the
vote was Brexit? How long would it take?
If the vote were Brexit, we've got 2 years.
You've seen the figures about sterling falling, about the immediate impact of Financial
Sterling
Times
falls
today
when we've got
says they'll have a
uncertainty.
2-year, it'll be a difficult period. Do you agree with that?
I think it will be a difficult period, but no more difficult than any democracy when they have a vote and make a decision to do something new. The reality is that we are not Norway, we're not Switzerland, we're not Canada, we are the 5th biggest economy in the world. We will be able to negotiate a deal. If you seriously think that the French and the Germans are going to go, right, you've knifed us in the back, we're off, we don't care anymore, and Mercedes and BMW aren't going to be in Angela Merkel's office the next day saying, are you insane? Britain is one of our biggest markets. They need to trade with us as much as we need to trade with them. They are not going to do us over. And one final point. David Cameron's argument seems to be that they will knife us in the back and they will turn us over if we do that. That's the same argument you give to a battered wife in a domestic abusive relationship. Go back to your violent husband, otherwise he might hurt you even more. If they're our friends, they will want to trade with us.
Well, what the Foreign Secretary said was that a leave vote would be seen as 2 fingers to Europe, and they would give 2 fingers back to us. And therefore,
and they don't want to sell us any cars, they don't want to sell anything to us. 16% of goods and services sold by the EU are sold to the British
ask Liz
people.
Truss.
Well, I think Britain is a great country. It's a fantastic country. Of course, we could do well if we were outside the EU. But I think the question is, how much better can we do by staying in the EU and continuing to take advantage of full access to the single market? Now, no other country has full access to goods and services without being part of free movement, without accepting those regulations and making sure that we share the rules and the system of Europe. Now, if people do want to leave, and I think it's a perfectly respectable point of view, I think they have to say what the alternative would look like and what the model would look like. The fact is, there is a process, a 2-year process, where we will be in limbo as a country. We'll be in a kind of twilight zone where we're looking at what the future options might look like.
2 years is not very long.
Well, it could be longer than 2 years, because we know how long it does take to reach decisions in the EU.
That's an argument for the EU, is it?
Well, but it's not just the EU. It's not just the EU. So let me give you one example from DEFRA, which is we are still negotiating to open up the US market to British beef 20 years after that market was closed due to BSE. Now, that is how long trade negotiations take.
So what do you think would happen?
And we've got 53 agreements with different countries around the world through the EU. Those would all have to be renegotiated. The single market access would have to be renegotiated.
People know that because you've said that and everybody else has said that. What do you think the damage of that would be? That's what's interesting.
Well,
how much would unemployment go up by? How much would trade fall by? How much would sterling fall by?
Well,
have you done an assessment of that
the
when you come to the defence of the government's position?
The government will be producing an assessment and
you haven't got it yet.
And we haven't got it yet. There will be an economic analysis. But not only will we spend our time trying to disentangle ourselves from these arrangements with the EU, think of all the stuff we could be doing instead. Think of what is really important in terms of improving our country, raising our productivity, reforming our welfare system, making sure our schools are better, thinking about the health service. We'll have the entire government machine tied up with disentangling ourselves from Europe, possibly never to get a better solution anyway. If you think 4 months is long to talk about this, imagine what 5 or 10 years.
So we shouldn't have had a referendum at all, should we?
Talking about these arrangements.
Okay.
I think it's right that people decide, but I know what I think is right for Britain.
Giles Fraser.
So people say economically it'll be a leap into the dark. We pay 50 million a day to the EU. We get some of it back, of course, when they let us and in the way they want. But in effect,
when you say, sorry, let's just hit this thing on the head of 50 million. The National Audit Office figure is 15 million.
Hang on.
Net of what
That's
is
what
given
I'm going to.
back.
I'm coming on to that.
This quote of 50 million, 50 million.
We give
it's
that
easy on the ear,
back.
but it's not accurate, is it?
So, but we are down 11 billion. We are down 11 billion pounds a year for being in Europe.
But it doesn't help your case to quote 50 billion
It's
when it's not the right figure.
Well, so we give it out and then we get some back, as exactly what I said to start with. But the point I'm trying to make is that I think we would be a net beneficiary financially of coming out, and that in itself is not a leap into the dark. That seems to be a leap into what I understand to be, anyway, I'm not going to bandy figures, £11 billion plus. That seems to be a pretty good leap into the dark. But let me just hang on. I'm happy to accept. Let me just concede the point. I'm happy to accept. I might be wrong about the figures. I'm not bandying figures about. That's just boring. Even if we were
bandying
poorer,
them about. That's what you were doing.
So, even if we're poorer, I think democracy is not for sale. And that, for me, is a fundamental point. Even if we're a bit poorer. And the economic stuff that's going on in Europe, for me, the crucial stuff, how the Greek people were treated in their financial crisis by the Europeans, how shamelessly, how trade deals are being negotiated, TTIP in our name, without us knowing a single thing about what's going on. This is the problem economically, and I don't want to nickel and dime over whether we'd be a little bit poorer, a little bit richer. Personally, I don't think democracy is for sale. We should come out.
Okay. Let's hear from some members of yours, and I'll come back to you. You sir in the front row there. Yes.
Unemployment is at a record low, and the economy is probably one of the best performing in Europe. Is that because of Europe or despite Europe?
Diane Abbott.
It's partly because of Europe. One of the strongest arguments for voting to stay in the EU is what coming out of the EU would do to jobs and the economy, and that's why the Labour Party and all of the trade unions are in favour of staying in. Julia.
Not all of the trade unions. ASLEF and RMT are not in favour of that.
Yeah, but they're not manufacturing unions. My point is this, that they will continue to sell to us, but our ability to sell to Europe could be fatally hampered by tariffs and a tariff war. And the other point is this, there is a great deal of manufacturing in this country, car manufacturers to begin with. Those manufacturers from Japan and so on are only here because we are within the EU. There are financial services companies that are only in London because we're within the EU. I think there are two problems. One, our goods would face a tariff war, and the other, that bit by bit, the headquarters of firms that have only come here because we're in the EU would relocate to the continent.
Okay. Julian, I'm going to come to you, but I'd like to hear from some members of the audience before I do. The woman over there, and then I'll come to you, sir, in the pink shirt there. Yes.
It's okay with the EU market, but surely our biggest price we have to pay is our safety. We've been letting in terrorists willy-nilly without actually checking them through. So what's the excuse? That's what I want to know.
So terrorism is what you think is the major issue?
Yeah, it is, because our safety. It's all right staying in the EU market, but how many are we letting through the EU?